Okay, this is the next video in the series on wisdom quotes from the book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Peter Rogers. And what we're doing here is we're going in alphabetical order of the different authors and their quotes. One thing to make clear is the book itself was only about 700 pages. We're actually not going through the text of the book. We're going through the text of my own personal notes, and I've got thousands of pages of quotes. So because of that, there'll be a little more background information. There'll be quotes that have been added since the publication of the book. I just mentioned that all to you. And sort of like, who is this for? Anybody who enjoys this sort of thing, or you can build up your quote collection. I've had it for many years, and I think, for example, if you go to the quote sites on the internet, you'll see lots of stupid quotes, and you're only going to like about 1 out of 20 of them. But I think you'll notice in my quotes, they've been sort of selected as being useful, so you have a much higher yield of useful information. Okay, we'll start out with Roger Ailes, and he was a famous news guy. He was also associated with Bill O'Reilly. Here's some of his quotes. When you walk into a room, absorb more and project less. You know, be more interested in looking around, seeing what's going on than just showing off your latest story for the day. Okay, Roger Ailes. I often tell my clients they should do at least 30% of all their reading outside their own field. This will give them perspective and knowledge that will make them more interesting. Yeah, I would definitely say that, because like a lot of biology people are kind of boring. And the reason is they had to study so much to get through pre-med, med school, residency that they stopped reading anything else. So they all kind of have the same generic knowledge. When you study something outside of that, like I can remember when we get new residents coming through the imaging guided surgery service, I always liked ones that had taken a gap year or something and done something else with their life besides just study biology. Okay, Robert Ailes. The most important thing is to be likable. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. If people like you, you'll get more favorable interview questions, etc., etc. What Roger Ailes says is if people like you, they listen to you, and if they don't, they won't. So that makes it important to be likable. But there's two different things. Being likable by the audience versus being likable by the billionaire you-know-whats of the world. And they're not the same thing. If you want to help the audience, you almost have to go the opposite direction. People like somebody who likes them. Okay, now we're going to do Edward Albee, the playwright. He lived from 1928 to 2016. And he says, the act of writing is optimism. You wouldn't take the trouble to write if you didn't feel that it matters. And I think there's some truth in that. For example, I make my YouTube channel, even though I know hardly anybody will watch it or hardly anybody will follow, but it will help the few that listen and do. And I also know that, things right now are not looking so great for hope and freedom in the world. But, we'll do what we can, and hopefully some freedom will remain. We shall see. Okay, Edward Albee's next quote. Art has the obligation to offend. Well, I don't know about to offend. If it's good, it'll sometimes ruffle some feathers, but a lot of so-called offensive stuff is garbage. Okay, Edward Albee continues. School curricula that ignore the arts produce highly educated barbarians. Yeah, you get people in schools. I really think schools teach way too much math, which most people don't use. And what they really should be teaching is the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the Renaissance, the Bible. All of that stuff makes you smart. If you ask a person, what do you remember from grade school and high school? Most people will tell you almost nothing except, how to type. And what I'm saying is when you learn those stories of the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, the Renaissance, and the Bible, you remember those stories. I still remember, I had to go to Sunday school, and I still remember the stuff I learned in Sunday school, even though at the time I thought it was a waste of time and stupid. I remember that stuff. Okay, Mitch Albom, he was born in 1958. His quote is, the way you get meaning in your life is to devote yourself to caring for others, the community around you, or to creating something that gives you purpose and meaning. So yeah, you get a sense of purpose from doing something good. And I think the reason why we feel good about doing nice things is we get a release of reward neurotransmitters in our brain. And I think it relates to your brain is saying, yeah, you're doing good because, our ancestors getting along with the people in their group meant survival. Humans on their own don't do so well in the wild. So your brain rewards you for doing socially positive things, whatever that might be. And I also think there's something in you older people that tells them to keep on living based on if it thinks they have meaningful interactions to continue with other people. I just think that's how most people are programmed. Okay, next is Alcibiades. He lived from 450 to 404 BC. Alcibiades was the best-looking, most handsome man in all of Greece, also perhaps the most mischievous. He was a big celebrity in the time of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. He was also pretty rich, like an aristocratic family. He was a nephew of Pericles, who was the ruler of Athens. And Alcibiades, his father had died when he was young, so he was adopted by Pericles. And Pericles saw to it that he was highly educated. And some people felt that Pericles himself was too secular. And this led to some disrespect of the gods. Alcibiades was mistreated, though, in many ways, too. He was, in some ways, like a military genius. And it reminded me of, in the Iliad, they needed an archer by the name of Philoctetes in order to win against Troy. And it also seems to be the case that they needed Alcibiades to win against the Spartans. And they screwed up. They were jealous of him, and they messed with him, and they made his life difficult. And don't get me wrong, he's no saint. Alcibiades, I think, unnecessarily pressured Athens to go to battle with Sicily, which I think was stupid. But then they screwed him over and took him away from the command, and they ended up losing, which was a bit of a shock. The whole Peloponnesian War is just sad to read about. So here you have the great ancient Greece led by Athens, and instead of working together with the other city-states, they go to war with them. And Pericles to some extent pushed that, which I think was totally stupid. And then he died of a plague, and so Athens was then on its own against Sparta, and they screwed over one of their best generals in the name of Alcibiades. So the whole thing was kind of sad, but also one of the most disgraceful, worst things that ever happened in all of ancient Greece was how the Athenians treated the neutral nation of Milos, who they actually felt was affiliated with Sparta, and it was bad. And okay, so that's one of the things that makes you not like ancient Greece. But if you look at the weight of the situation, the overall good versus the bad, I would say the ancient Greeks are like about 70% good, make it more than that, 80% good and about 20% bad. There's no perfect culture. They just were terrible to the Melians, of the island of Milos. Sort of the Thrasymachus view of justice, that might is right. So I'm not going to go into all the stuff about Alcibiades. It's there if you want to read it. He certainly was pretty interesting, but not a lot of useful information comes out of Alcibiades other than don't make people jealous of you for no reason, and don't go fooling around with the wife of Spartan king, because they're going to come after you. Okay, that was rather stupid, and hadn't we learned that already from Paris and Helen of Troy? Okay, one quote by Alcibiades: Socrates is a magician with words. All right, so the next one here is Bronson Alcott, lived from 1799 to 1888. First quote is, "To be ignorant of one's ignorance is the malady of the ignorant." Yeah, most Americans are so ignorant that they don't even know it. They're ahistorical. And so they can't judge anything because they don't have any historical perspective. That's why I think, in general, people who were born in Europe and then came here later are smarter. And what I mean by that is, if you talk to somebody who grew up in Europe, they can tell you the difference between, one European country versus the other. France, Spain, Italy, Poland, Germany, Austria. They've got perspective versus Americans just think everything's the way it is because that's just how it is. And when you think that way, and Americans tend to think that the big money cares about them. Not anymore, but they had for many years. And it's a first step of wisdom is to realize that no one cares about you. Once you get that, then you learn how to take care of yourself much better. Okay, Bronson Alcott. Devotees of grammatical studies have not been distinguished for any remarkable facilities of language. Yeah, that's a good point. You almost never hear of a good writer who started out as an English teacher. So being a grammarian and being a good writer are not the same thing at all. Being a good writer, I think, is largely having something useful to say and saying it in a pleasant, entertaining way. And the key to writing well is know your subject and then write as if you were talking to a friend. That works. Okay, next, Alexander the Great. He lived from 356 to 323 BC. He was the son of King Philip of Macedon. The Macedonians were growing in power in large part because of King Philip, and they conquered ancient Greece. And Alexander the Great himself, he was very heroic, he was brilliant, kind of crazy, and he was really also to a large extent a barbarian. One thing I love about him, though, is he did love ancient Greek culture. He was exposed to having Aristotle as a tutor for a while, and Aristotle had been a student of Plato, So Aristotle was the smartest man in the whole world. And so when Alexander went around conquering the known world, he brought Greek culture there, which was an improvement on their past. And he even would send biological specimens back to Aristotle, who was a biologist in many ways. But Aristotle was not as popular in Athens as he should have been because he was seen as an outsider, a Macedonian, and the Macedonians were in the process of starting to conquer Greece. So, out of jealousy, the Athenians sometimes would tear up Aristotle's books, and a lot of what comes down to us from Aristotle is just notes from students. It's not really, Plato's legacy was much better preserved than Aristotle's, even though Aristotle was a lot smarter than Plato. Okay, after Alexander the Great died, some Athenians tried to stir up trouble against Aristotle, so he had to flee from Athens, if you will, and he died a few months later, sadly, in exile from Athens. He was only about 63 years old. Alexander the Great, when he was young, had showed incredible talent and dominance in his ability to train the wild stallion named Bucephalus. Okay, and there were some other people who talked about Bucephalus, like Hank Williams Jr. So that's another long story. So I do like that he spread Greek culture around to the east. When he visited the tomb of Achilles, he spoke to the soul of Achilles and said, "O fortunate youth, to have found a Homer as the herald of your glory." So Alexander the Great, these guys have giant egos. That's why they have giant achievements. He felt that he needed somebody that would write about his exploits. And then Alexander the Great had conquered so much at such a young age. Later on, Julius Caesar was very jealous of him, Alexander the Great. And also, a lot of people wanted to name themselves after Alexander, after Alexander the Great. And later on, people would want to name themselves Julius after Julius Caesar, the great general. I would rather name myself after an intellectual person, like after Aristotle. I like seeing myself as trying to be like Aristotle. Okay, or Aquinas, Aristotle and Aquinas. Those are two of my heroes. Okay, Aristotle basically classified all the useful knowledge of the known world at that time. And Aquinas, his great achievement was to sort of bring Aristotelianism into Christianity, in the sense to make it more acceptable and sort of show that faith and reason go together. They are not opposed. They work together totally. And real scholars know that. Okay, everywhere he went, Alexander carried a copy of the Iliad that had been annotated by Aristotle. After Alexander, as a teenager, tamed the massive horse Bucephalus, his father said, "My son, ask for thyself another kingdom, for that which I leave is too small for thee." And that's a really good song by Iron Maiden called Alexander the Great. Okay, Nelson Algren quotes, he was born in 1909. I don't know when he died. "Walk on the Wild Side" was the name of his title. Okay, that's just a famous song. James Allen from 1864 to 1942 said, "Self-control is strength, calmness is power." Yeah, real power players know how to keep their mouth shut even when they're unhappy with a situation. They don't just blurt out impulsively. They assess the situation and they make a decision. Is it wise to speak or not? So having good self-control is a form of power, Okay, Woody Allen. I don't have the dates of his life, but he's pretty famous. We all know of him. He said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying. I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens." Woody Allen continues, "Confidence is what you have before you understand the problem. Paranoia is what you've got after knowing all the facts. Just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. More than any other time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray that we have the wisdom to choose wisely." Okay, Woody Allen continues, "If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Life is a concentration camp. You're stuck here and there's no way out, and you can only rage impotently against your persecutors. I'm giving my analyst one more year, and then I'm going to Lourdes," the famous sanctuary place. Woody Allen. Okay, so that's it for this session of quotes. Hope that was useful.